The morning of my daughter Zara's wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. The sun poured golden light into our home, flowers were arranged with loving care, and the scent of jasmine and roses lingered in the air. I watched Zara as she got ready, her eyes sparkling with excitement, her laughter echoing through the hall. I had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl, imagining her walking down the aisle, and now that dream was finally coming true. Everything seemed perfect until Ramiz, my son-in-law, approached me. I remembered the moment as if it were frozen in time. His eyes didn't have warmth, his smile didn't reach his face. He leaned slightly closer and said, in a voice colder than I ever thought possible, "I think the greatest gift for our wedding would be if you disappear from our family." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the table for support. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would give away the shock I tried so desperately to hide. I stared at him, hoping for some hint of jest, some sign that I had misheard. But his expression was firm, unyielding. He really meant it. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to ask how someone could say such cruel words to the woman who had raised his wife, who had poured love, care, and guidance into her life. But the words caught in my throat, my eyes stung, and I blinked rapidly to hold back tears. Zara was nearby, smiling at him with trust and joy, completely unaware of the storm brewing just between us. The rest of the day was a blur. Guests arrived, cameras clicked, and laughter filled the house, but I couldn't shake the weight of Ramiz's words. Each smile I forced, each polite nod I gave, felt like a mask hiding a fire that threatened to consume me from the inside. I realized then that this wasn't just a careless remark, it was a declaration, a challenge, a direct attempt to erase me from their lives. As I helped Zara with her veil, I whispered softly, "You're going to have the most beautiful day, my love. Nothing can take that from you." My voice trembled, but I hid it behind a smile. Deep down, I knew that staying silent wouldn't be enough. I had to find a way to respond, but it had to be on my terms. That night, as the celebrations wound down, I sat alone in my room. I thought about the life I had built, the sacrifices I had made, and the love I had poured into my family. I realized that if Ramiz thought I would simply fade away, he had gravely underestimated me. A plan began to form in my mind, a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I wasn't going to disappear in defeat. I was going to disappear in a way that would make him realize the value of respect, the weight of absence, and the strength of a mother's love. And I knew that, when the time came, nothing would stop me from carrying out that plan. The days following the wedding were a living nightmare. Ramiz avoided me at every opportunity, his eyes sliding past mine as if I didn't exist. At family gatherings, he whispered to Zara, subtly undermining my advice and ridiculing my presence. Every smile I forced felt heavy, every polite nod a mask for the storm brewing inside me. The warmth of the wedding had vanished, replaced by tension so thick I could almost touch it. Zara noticed. One evening, while folding laundry in her new home, she finally confronted me. "Mom, why is he treating you this way? Did I do something wrong?" Her voice trembled, a mix of confusion and sadness. My heart ached at her words. How could I explain that this wasn't about her at all, that this was about a man who thought he could erase someone's love and presence with arrogance? I chose my words carefully. "Zara, nothing you did caused this. Some people don't understand the value of family until it's too late, but I want you to be happy, and I'll do what it takes to protect that happiness." She looked at me, searching my face for reassurance, and I smiled. Though my chest felt tight with pain, it wasn't long before I realized that staying in the house, enduring his silent hostility, was only giving him power over me. Every insult, every dismissive glance, fed his belief that he could control the narrative, that I could be bullied into submission, and I wasn't going to let that happen, not to myself, not in my daughter's home, and certainly not under his roof. So, I made a decision. I would leave, but on my own terms. I would vanish in a way that protected Zara, hurt no one, but still sent a clear message to Ramiz. Disrespect has consequences. I began quietly planning my departure, packing a few personal items at a time, and preparing my mind for the moment I would walk out. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine in front of Zara. She deserved her happiness and her new life with Ramiz, but I knew that my absence might eventually make her see the truth. I started writing a letter, not of blame, but of love. A letter she could read later, to understand my heart and my intentions. It was my way of ensuring she knew I would never abandon her, even if I had to leave her side physically. That night, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight reflect on the quiet streets. I felt a mixture of fear, sadness, and determination. Leaving meant stepping into the unknown, but it also meant reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect, and my strength. And deep down, I knew this was the only way to teach Ramiz the lesson he needed to learn. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and soon, my silence would echo in a way no one could ignore. If you're captivated by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more emotional stories that touch the heart. After days of enduring Ramiz's cold stares and subtle jabs, I knew it was time to take action. Staying in the house meant giving him power over my emotions, my dignity, and my sense of self. I had raised Zara with all the love a mother could give, and no one, absolutely no one, had the right to undermine that. The plan I began forming was not born from anger, but from clarity. I would leave, yes, but on my own terms, in a way that could never be ignored or dismissed. I started quietly, gathering the essentials I could take with me, a few changes of clothes, important documents, and precious keepsakes that reminded me of my life outside the wedding chaos. I carefully packed letters, old photographs, and small trinkets of Zara's childhood memories that Ramiz could never tarnish or erase. I wanted to disappear, but not without leaving a trace of love behind for my daughter to hold on to. At night, I sat at the small desk in my room and began writing a letter to Zara. I didn't blame anyone, nor did I criticize. My words flowed from a place of love and wisdom, gently reminding her of her strength and the love that would always surround her, even if I wasn't physically present. I wanted her to understand that my departure wasn't abandonment, it was an act of protection, dignity, and a lesson in respect. I also thought about my own life beyond the family home. Where could I go? How could I ensure that my disappearance was complete and irreversible? At least for a time, I researched safe places, small apartments where I could start fresh, rebuild, and breathe freely without fear of judgment or confrontation. I even considered reconnecting with old friends I had lost touch with over the years, people who knew me before the wedding stress, who reminded me of the woman I had been before. Ramiz's arrogance threatened to define me. Every night, I rehearsed in my mind how I would leave, how I would remain calm, composed, and silent. I refused to allow anger to dictate my actions. This was about dignity, not revenge. The thought of Ramiz realizing that his words had consequences gave me a quiet satisfaction. He would have no one to blame but himself for underestimating the strength of a mother's love. Despite the careful planning, fear occasionally crept in. Could I truly vanish from my daughter's life without hurting her? Would Ramiz notice my absence in the way I hoped he would? I reminded myself that my plan wasn't cruel, it was deliberate, strategic, and necessary. Sometimes, love requires tough decisions, even if they sting in the moment. By the end of the week, everything was ready. My suitcase was packed, my letter carefully folded and placed where Zara would find it, and my heart braced for the unknown. I had made peace with what I was about to do. Soon, I would take the first step toward reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my power, and the lesson for Ramiz would be unforgettable. The night I decided to leave was darker than usual, though the moonlight spilled softly across the quiet streets. Inside the house, the air was still, and everyone slept, unaware that a life-changing decision was about to unfold. My suitcase sat ready in the corner, my letter for Zara carefully folded atop it. Every item I had packed was a piece of my life, a silent farewell that carried my love, my dignity, and my resolve. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear, sadness, and anticipation. Leaving meant stepping into the unknown, but it also meant reclaiming my sense of self, something I had almost lost to Ramiz's arrogance. I tiptoed to Zara's room, making sure her soft breaths told me she was asleep. I didn't want to wake her, didn't want her to see the pain in my eyes or the hesitation in my hands. This was not a moment for tears, it was a moment of quiet strength. On her dresser, I left the note I had written earlier. My dearest Zara, this isn't goodbye forever. I love you more than words can express. Take care of your heart, and never let anyone dim your light. Love, Mom. Each word was chosen carefully, a promise of love and a reminder of her inner strength. I knew she would read it in the morning and understand that my departure wasn't abandonment, but an act of courage and dignity. I quietly walked out the door, closing it behind me as if sealing a chapter of my life. The streets were empty, lit only by the glow of street lamps reflecting on the pavement. My car waited, packed and ready, a vessel to carry me away from the tension and into a space where I could breathe again. As I drove, a calm settled over me. Every mile I put between myself and the house felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that had been overshadowed by someone else's disrespect. I didn't look back, not once. The house, the wedding, the arguments all stayed behind, frozen in a world that no longer had power over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt free, unburdened, and in control. My heart still ached for my daughter, but I knew I had acted out of love, protecting her and myself in equal measure. That night, I realized something important. Leaving doesn't always mean giving up. Sometimes, it means standing up in the quietest, strongest way possible. Rameez would soon understand the weight of my absence, the lesson I had chosen to teach without a single word of confrontation. And in that darkness, driving toward a new beginning, I felt a spark of hope. Life could continue, love could endure, and dignity could remain intact, even in the face of disrespect. This was not the end, it was the start of a journey on my own terms, a journey that no one could dictate or diminish. If you're hooked by this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more emotional stories that will touch your heart and keep you coming back for more. The first morning in my new apartment felt surreal. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed tea reminded me that life could go on even after heartbreak, humiliation, and betrayal. I unpacked my belongings slowly, carefully placing each photograph, trinket, and keepsake in a way that felt intentional, as if reclaiming control over my surroundings would help me reclaim control over my life. For weeks, I allowed myself to breathe, to rest, and to reflect, away from the tension of Zara's home. I rediscovered a part of me I had almost forgotten, the woman who had dreams, hobbies, and passions outside her role as a mother and caretaker. I joined a small local book club, reconnected with old friends, and even began painting again. Something I hadn't done since before the wedding. Chaos consumed me. Each day was a small victory, a reminder that life didn't end just because someone tried to make me feel invisible. But even in this newfound peace, I kept one eye on Zara. I hadn't disappeared to abandon her. I had left to teach a lesson, but also to protect her from the toxicity she hadn't yet realized. From afar, I watched her adjust to married life, observing subtle changes in her demeanor. She was quieter, less confident, and I knew the influence of Rameez's arrogance had seeped into her spirit. My absence had already begun to make him realize the weight of his actions, the emptiness he had created by pushing away someone who had always loved him and his wife unconditionally. Each day, I reminded myself that this wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, dignity, and showing my daughter that strength isn't always loud. It can be quiet, patient, and deliberate. I kept a journal, documenting my thoughts and feelings, and planned small gestures of love for Zara that I could leave behind when the time was right. Letters, phone calls, and little surprises allowed her to feel my presence without letting Rameez regain control over the narrative. One evening, while sipping tea on the balcony, I realized something profound. My disappearance wasn't just a lesson for Rameez, it was a transformation for me. I had stepped out of a role that had been dictated by others and stepped into a life on my own terms. The sense of empowerment was intoxicating. I wasn't merely surviving, I was thriving, reclaiming a part of myself that had been suppressed for too long. Even in this freedom, I felt a quiet anticipation. Rameez would feel the absence of my love, guidance, and presence in a way he never expected. He had demanded my disappearance, and now, finally, he would understand its consequences. And through it all, I held on to one truth. My love for Zara was unwavering, my choices were deliberate, and my life was no longer defined by the expectations or arrogance of anyone else. For the first time in a long while, I was at peace, and that peace, I knew, would become the foundation for everything that was yet to come. It had been weeks since I left, and life in my new apartment had settled into a comforting rhythm. I was painting again, reconnecting with old friends, and savoring the quiet moments I hadn't experienced in years. I had convinced myself that this was the life I needed: peaceful, independent, and free from the tension that Rameez had brought into our family. Then, one rainy afternoon, my phone rang. The screen lit up with Zara's name. My heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since I had heard her voice directly, without intermediaries or awkward encounters. I answered, trying to keep my tone calm, but the moment I heard her trembling voice, I realized something was wrong. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she whispered. her words almost swallowed by her sobs. Everything feels heavy. I can't handle him anymore. My chest tightened as I listened, her pain slicing through the distance I had created for my own peace. I reminded myself why I had left. This wasn't abandonment. It was a way to protect both of us while showing Ramis the consequences of his arrogance. We spoke for hours. She told me about the subtle control, the constant undermining, and the pressure she felt from Ramis. I listened quietly, offering words of reassurance, love, and guidance. I reminded her of her worth, her strength, and the life she deserved, one filled with respect, not fear or suppression. Every sentence I spoke was carefully chosen, a balm for her wounded spirit, and a spark to ignite her courage during that call. I realized something profound. My disappearance had done more than distance myself from toxicity. It had created space for Zara to see the reality she had been ignoring. She began to understand that her happiness was in her hands, not in the hands of someone who tried to erase the people who truly loved her. For the first time, she admitted she had taken my presence for granted, not out of malice, but because it had always been a constant. By the end of the conversation, Zara's voice was steadier, filled with a new determination. I felt a sense of relief mixed with pride. My absence had been painful, yes, but it had also been transformative. It had allowed both of us to step back, reflect, and recognize the boundaries necessary to protect our hearts. As I hung up, I looked out at the rain-soaked city, realizing that sometimes love isn't about clinging, it's about letting go, creating distance, and trusting that the lesson will reach the right hearts. Ramis would feel the absence of my love, guidance, and presence more acutely than he ever imagined, and Zara would emerge stronger, wiser, and ready to claim the life she deserved. If you're touched by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more emotional stories that inspire and move the heart. Weeks had passed since that emotional call with Zara, and I had settled further into my new life. Each day, I grew stronger, more independent, and more certain that leaving had been the right choice. Yet, even in my peace, I couldn't ignore the subtle ripples my absence had caused back in Zara's home. Ramis was beginning to understand slowly but unmistakably that actions have consequences, and arrogance can only carry you so far. It started with small things. Guests noticed my absence, and whispers began circulating in family circles. Ramis, who once walked through the house with confidence and entitlement, now seemed unsettled. Friends and relatives asked after me, and he could no longer ignore the void I had left. Slowly, he began to realize the magnitude of underestimating someone who had loved, guided, and supported his wife for years. Then came the first phone call from him. I ignored it. His tone was cautious, almost pleading. When he left a voicemail, a stark contrast to the coldness I had endured at the wedding. But I remained resolute. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. I had already done what was necessary. I had protected myself and created space for Zara to see the truth of her marriage. Zara, meanwhile, began asserting herself more boldly. She confronted him gently but firmly, expressing her feelings about his dismissive and controlling behavior. The change in her demeanor was striking: confidence replacing fear, clarity replacing confusion. Ramis could no longer dominate or belittle her without consequence. And he started to see that the absence of my presence had removed the buffer he once took for granted. The final moment of reckoning came during a family dinner. Ramis tried to address me, his tone formal and uncertain, as though testing the waters, but I remained calm, composed, and unwavering. His arrogance had been stripped away by my silence, and the realization hit him hard. My absence had spoken louder than any argument ever could. He understood that respect isn't demanded through control. It's earned through empathy and humility. I watched in quiet satisfaction as Zara stood beside me, her head held high, eyes shining with newfound courage. The lesson I had intended to teach had taken root. Ramis now recognized not only my strength but the invaluable role I had always played in our family. My disappearance had been deliberate, calculated, and necessary, and its effects were evident. In the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred. Ramis began to treat me with civility and even respect. Though our relationship was not fully healed, the power dynamics had changed, and I felt a sense of closure. I had proven that dignity and self-respect are forces that cannot be ignored, and sometimes, the most profound lessons are delivered through absence rather than confrontation. Months had passed since my disappearance, and life had taken on a rhythm that felt both strange and liberating. The pain of leaving Zara's home had softened, replaced by a quiet sense of empowerment. I had reclaimed my space, my independence, and my dignity. But even in this newfound freedom, my heart longed for the day I could reunite with my daughter, not out of necessity, but out of love and choice. When that day finally came, it was different than I had imagined. I didn't march back dramatically or demand apologies. I walked into Zara's home with calmness, confidence, and a renewed sense of self. She greeted me with tears in her eyes, a mix of relief and gratitude. And for the first time since the wedding, our embrace was unburdened by tension. She didn't need my guidance to confront Ramusi. She had found her own voice, but she needed my presence to remind her that love can be steady, patient, and unwavering. Ramis was present too, but the atmosphere was different. Gone was the arrogance and coldness that had defined him during the wedding. Instead, there was hesitation, awareness, and respect. He had learned, in the harshest but most effective way possible, that disregarding a mother's love and dignity has consequences. My absence had been his teacher, and he now approached the relationship with humility he had never shown before. Over the next few weeks, a new balance emerged. Zara's voice was strong and confident, her happiness genuine, and our family dynamic transformed. I realized that leaving had not only been a lesson for Ramis, but also for my daughter, and for myself. I had discovered that strength comes in many forms, sometimes in action, sometimes in silence, and sometimes in walking away. There was a beauty in this new beginning. I could participate in Zara's life without compromising my dignity, and I could love without fear of being disrespected. The past months had taught me that boundaries are not barriers, they are protections that allow love and respect to flourish. And I had proven, most importantly to myself, that courage sometimes requires stepping into the unknown, trusting that your choices will shape the future for the better. As I stood in the living room one evening, watching Zara laugh and share a meal with friends, I felt a profound sense of peace. Life had given me a second chance not to undo the past, but to embrace the present with clarity, confidence, and love. My journey had been painful, yes, but it had led to growth, understanding, and a renewed bond with my daughter. And so, a new chapter began, not defined by arrogance or conflict, but by respect, dignity, and unconditional love. The lesson was clear. Sometimes, the strongest way to protect those you love is by showing them, through your actions, the power of your presence and your absence. If you were moved by this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more emotional and heart-touching stories that will stay with you forever.